How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Nun Zayin, Daf 57 of Masechta Zevachim. Friends, Daf Nun Zayin is the last Daf of Perek Ezu Mekomen. I feel like that's a really big milestone. I'm telling you, I think I'm 37. I've known about Ezu Mekomen since I'm probably pretty young. I'll just throw out another, let's say 10 years old. I don't know. Finally at 37, I'm like learning the Perek of Ezu Mekomen and Zevachim. That's pretty awesome. I feel like that's like we've all done it. We've all learned Perek Ezu Mekomen. I mean, I feel like that's a pretty big deal. Like it's like sitting there in plain sight in the siddur, and we had the opportunity to actually learn it properly, which is pretty awesome. So today is the last daf of Perek Ezu Mekomen, and on today's daf we discuss Bechor, Meiser, and Pesach. The first small little section of the daf discusses the Zrikas Hadam and Aktaris Emurin of the Bechor, Meiser, and Pesach, and then for the bulk of today's daf, we divide them up into two groups. The first being Bechor and Meiser, the second one being Pesach. We first discuss what is the time frame for eating the Korban Bechor and the Korban Meiser. That's really the big sugya on today's daf. Pretty interesting stuff. And at the very end, we finish off Perek Ezu Mekomen with a little throwback to Daf Tesav Masechta Brachos. Then that was Daf Tesav Masechta Brachos. Was that? I guess that was probably the 8th day that we were learning Babble on Talmud together. So Machlokus of Belozer ben Azariah and Rabbi Kiva about the time frame for eating Korban Pesach. Friends, this is what we have in store for us on Daf Nun Zayin of Masechta Zevachim. Let us jump in. Friends, we begin on Daf Nun Vav Omid Beis at the Mishnah, about 10-15 lines from the bottom of Bechor, V'Meiser, V'Pesach, Kodshim Kalim. Okay, Bechor. Who could tell me what the Korban Bechor is? Why should I say? Let's let the Pasuk say for us. The Pasuk says, Ach Bechor Shor. I'm reading you the Pasuk. Ach Bechor Shor, the firstborn of a ox, cow, ox. O Bechor Kesef, or the firstborn of a sheep. O Bechor Eiz, or the firstborn male of a goat. Losifte Kodesh Emes Domam Tizok Al Mezbech V'Schabim Takter Isha Rech Nichoach La Hashem. They are offered as a korban. So if a cow, a sheep, or a goat has a firstborn male child, right, meaning it's their firstborn and it is male, that animal will be offered will be offered as a korban and it will be eaten by the Kohanim. Basically, it's given to the Kohanim and it's offered as a korban. Meiser is every 10th animal would, I believe, also from either cows, sheep, goats. Every year there's new flock and animals, so every 10th one is going to be offered as a korban. And Korban Pesach, of course, is the Pesach offering offered once a year, right before Pesach. So when it comes to these three korbanos, Kodshim Kalim, they are Kodshim Kalim, Shchutosim B'chol Makom B'Azar, and as Kodshim Kalim, they can be slaughtered anywhere in the Azar Matana Echad. Now, what's interesting about these korbanos is that I don't think that we saw this with any of the other korbanos, that they require just one zrika, right? You throw the blood against the mizbeach. The only requirement there is that it be in a part of the mizbeach that has a yesod. Otherwise, my impression is just chuck it on the western side, the northern side, anywhere where there's a yesod. Take the blood, chuck it in one go, and that is that. Shina b'achilasan. Now, even though up until this point, Bechor, Meiser, and Pesach have had the same halachis, in terms of shchitas b'chol makom azar v'damaton matona echas v'vachitin keneged esod. However, shina b'achilas, when it comes to eating the Bechor and Meiser and Pesach, there are different halachas. A Bechor nechal l'kohanim. So a Bechor is eaten by the kohanim. It's given to the kohanim. They offer it, and the meat is eaten by the kohanim. A Meiser l'chol adam. Meiser behema is basically like a shlomim kind of thing, and therefore it can be eaten by anybody. V'nechalim b'chol ha'ir. Now both the Bechor and the Meiser as kodshim kalim, they can be eaten anywhere in Jerusalem. B'chol meichol, cook it however you like. L'shnei le'echad, for 2 days and the night between. This is going to be a big discussion on today's daf. How exactly how we learn out that Bechor and Meiser are eaten for 2 days and the night between. We're going to actually see a machlokas. There's another opinion that maybe it's only 1 day. So this is going to be a big part of today's discussion. HaPesach, now when it comes to Korban Pesach, balayla is of course eaten at the Seder. It's eaten at the Seder. And it can only be eaten until midnight. And it can only be eaten by those who have already kind of joined together milichatchila in advance to be part of, to get in on that Korban Pesach. And it, unlike some of the other korbanos where we said, b'chol meichol, cook it however you like, not by Korban Pesach. Korban Pesach must be roasted. Givaldic. Says the Gemara Mantana, who is the Tana of our Mishnah who says that Bechor, Meiser, Pesach, they are the same when it comes to Zrikas Adam, Aktaris Emurin. Omer Rav Chizda Rabbi Yosef Glili, he says of Rav Chizda that this is Rabbi Yosef Glili. Now we have seen this already on Daf Lamed Zayin. Decided they were learning the Brayso. Rabbi Yosef Glili, Omer says Rabbi Yosef Glili, Chelbo lo nemer le chelbom, Damar lo nemer le domam, Limeid al Bechor u'Meiser u'Pesach, Shatuna ma'an domim, ve'emurin legabe mizbech. Who remembers this Gemara? So back in that pasuk that I read just a few minutes ago, I will read it Nachamol, I'll read it again now. The pasuk says, Ach b'chor shor, or b'chor kesef, or b'chor ez lo sifte, kodesh heim es damam, their blood, tizok al mizbech, veschelbam, their fats, taktir, you shall burn isher ech micholach l'Hashem. So when it comes, so we're talking about the Bechor, okay, the Korban Bechor, and yet we say chelbam, their fats. We say damam, their bloods. What's the plural? So one pshat is to say it's talking about the shor, the kesef, the ez. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael, if you remember from Daf Lamed Zayin. But Rabbi Yosef Glili's shita is that what's the plural? If we're only talking about Bechor, so what's plural? Plural is to include Meiser, to include Korban Pesach. That when the pasuk says V'zarkos, no. When the pasuk says, "As damam tizrak al mizbech v'eschelbam taktir," when it says damam chelbam, that their blood is thrown on the mizbech, that their fats are burnt, it's to equate what's there, right? If it's talking about the Bechor, what's the plural? It's saying Bechor, Meiser, and Pesach. In all three of those scenarios, their blood is thrown on the Mizbeach in the same way, as well as they have the same halachas for Aktoras a Murin. So again, the Tanya Rabbi Yosef Glili, Omer says Rabbi Yosef Glili, Chelbo lo nemer, doesn't say Chelbo singular, el Chelbam plural. Damar lo nemer doesn't say its blood, el Damam their blood. Limeid al Bechor u'Meiser u'Pesach. It teaches not just about Bechor, but also about Meiser and Pesach. Shetunin ma'in damim ve'emurim legab mizbeach, that they require the blood to be thrown on the Mizbeach, as well as the Emurin to be burnt on the Mizbeach. I'm going to drink a tad of water. Okay. Kineged hayisod minolan. How do we know that, right, we had said in the Mishnah that v'daman ton matona achas, that their blood is thrown one time on the Mizbeach, so long as the blood is thrown on a part of the Mizbeach that has a yesod beneath it. How do we know? How do we know this? Oh, maybe Allah. This is a blazer. Zrika me Allah. Oh, well, here by Bechor it talks about Zrika Sadam, right? It says as Domam Tizrok, and by Korban Ola it also talks about Zrika Sadam. It says Vizarku Sadam al Mizbeach Sov. So we have a Gezer Shavet. It says Zrika by Bechor. It says Zrika by Korban Ola. Ola Gufmin Ola. How do we know that an Ola requires Yisod? So we learned that earlier. Tichsiv is supposed to say El Yisod Mizbach HaOla. If you remember that old discussion about Yisod Mizbach HaOla, that the Ola requires Yisod. Now, the truth is, in the end, we ended up learning out from a Kal V'chomer, but it says Rashi, even if we didn't have the Kal V'chomer, then we would be able to learn it out from here. But anyways, Ola requires that the blood be thrown on a part of the Mizbeach that has a Yisod. Lamed al, you could skip the word Chova. Lamed al Ola Shatuna Yisod. Okay, so it teaches that Ola requires Yisod, and we have a Gzeira Shava now from Bechor, right, between Bechor and Ola, just like Ola requires Yisod, so Bechor, and by extension, Meiser and Pesach, also require Yisod. Okay, but that's not all by the Korban Ola. By the Korban Ola, yes, it has to be thrown on the Mizbech with his Yisod, but also Shtayim Shein Arba. By Korban Ola, it's not right. We said in the Mishnah, V'dam matona echas. We said now, Mishnah, that by Bechor, Meiser, Pesach, you just have to throw the blood against the Mizbech once. But by Ola, Shtayim Shein Arba, essentially you have to throw the blood on all four of the sides of the Mizbech. So if we're learning out Gzeira Shava from Ola to Bechor and Meiser and Pesach, so we should say that not only is there a requirement for Yisod, but also Shtayim Shein Arba. Amar Abaye says Abaye, Lamed Michtav Soviv Ba'ola Soviv Bechatas. Well, says Abaye, well, interestingly, how do we know that it's Shtayim Shein Arba by Ola? How do we know that by Korban Ola the blood is thrown Shtayim Shein Arba, but the blood is thrown all around the Mizbech because it says Soviv. It says Soviv by Korban Ola. I guess, well, interestingly enough, it's not the only place where it says Soviv. It also says Soviv by Korban Chatas. And now, therefore, since we have some places where, by some korbanos it says saviv, around, and by other korbanos it doesn't say saviv. For example, by Bechor, it doesn't say anything about saviv. So even though we learn out the Gzeira Shava of Zrika to learn that by Bechor it has to have Yisod, but in terms of Shtayim Shein Arba, if it only said saviv by Ola, okay, Mela, sure, you can learn out from Ola, not just Yisod, but also Shtayim Shein Arba. But Korban Ola is not the only place where it says Saviv. It also says Saviv by Korban Chatas. And therefore, since apparently there are some Korbanos where it says Yisod, when the Torah wants you to know that, no, I'm sorry, not Yisod, but Saviv. I hope I didn't just mess it up. We're talking about Saviv. By the Korban Ola, there's Yisod, and we learn out to Bechor that it also needs Yisod. But by Korban Ola, it also says Saviv, to learn that Shtayim Shein Arba, that the blood needs to be thrown around it. The thing is that it also says Saviv by Korban Chatas. Therefore, the Torah is showing that for the Korbanos that should have Saviv, Shtayim Shein Arba, the Torah will let you know. The Torah let us know by Ola, the Torah let us know by Chatas. The Torah did not let us know by Bechor. And therefore, says Abaye, Saviv does not apply to Bechor. There's no Shtayim Shein Arba by Bechor. Again, Amar Abaye says Abaye, Lamli l'michtav Saviv ba'ola Saviv b'chatas. How come it says Saviv both by Ola and by Chatas. Why not just have it by Ola and say, just like by Ola it's Saviv, so also by all the other Korbanos, by Chatas also it's Saviv, and guess what? Also by Bechor. The fact that the Torah says Saviv by Ola and by Chatas, and it doesn't say Saviv by Bechor, is because Ola and Chatas are Shnei Ksuvin Abayin Ke'echad. That, as we explained and as we've learned in other instances, that again, you can have a binyan av. If you just write something in one place, you could say, okay, just like it's in that place, it's in other places. But when the Torah says something specifically in two places, it's because it's limited to those two places, and it cannot, in this case, be applied to Bechor. However, that's a machlekes though. The concept of the concept of when you have something written in two places, you can't therefore apply it to other places. Rather, it's limited to those two places. That's actually a machlokes. There's another opinion that says, no, you can. You can apply it. Just like it says Saviv by Ola and Chatas, we can apply it to Bechor as well in principle. So then why don't we? The answer is, well, because guess what? There's another place where it says Saviv by Korban Osham. Okay, so now it says Saviv by Ola, it says Saviv by Chatas, it says Saviv by Osham, and it doesn't say Saviv by Bechor. You know why? Because Bechor doesn't require Saviv, and since it's written in three places, Ola, Chatas, Osham, whenever you have something written in three places, okay, for sure you can't apply it to places where it's not written, right? If the Torah wrote Saviv in three places, it's limited to those three places. We have Bechor where it doesn't say Saviv, no Saviv. Gewaldig. So essentially we learn from, right, so the Gzeira Shava from Ola to Bechor teaches that just like Ola requires Yisod, Bechor also requires Yisod. But in terms of Saviv, no. It doesn't say Saviv by Bechor, therefore there's no Saviv by Bechor, just one throwing of the blood is sufficient. And now we get up to the big sugya of today's daf, how long you have to eat the Bechor and the Meiser. Let's go weiter. Ha-Bechor nechol l'kohanim. So we said in the Mishnah that the Bechor and the Meiser can be eaten for Shnei Yomim v'layla echod, like a Korban Shlomim, that Bechor and Meiser can be eaten for 2 days and the night between them. Now, says the Gemara Tana Rabbana, Minayin the Bechor shenechol Shnei Yomim v'layla echod. Now, how do we know that the Bechor can be eaten for Shnei Yom v'layla echad for 2 days and the night in between? Shneimar, the pasuk says, "U'v'saram yiyeh loch kachaze atnuva kayomin." That the pasuk says that the flesh of the Korban Bechor will be loch, will be to you, to the Kohanim. Kachaze atnuva kayomin, like the breast and the thigh. So it's saying by Bechor, it could be eaten. What is it? That in the Torah says that the meat of the Bechor will be for the Kohanim like the breast and the thigh. Like which breast and the thigh? So the pasuk is comparing the Bechor with the breast and the thigh of a Korban Shlomim. That is the breast. That's the chaz of a shok that we're talking about. The chaz of a shok of the Shlomim, and therefore Mashlom nechol Shnei v'layla echad. And just like a Korban Shlomim is eaten for 2 days and the night in between, Bechor nechol Shnei v'layla echad. Guess what? The same applies to Bechor. Shnei Yomim v'layla echad. V'zo sheila nishal lefnei chacham b'kerem b'yavne. And this shaila was asked before the sages in Kerem b'Yavne, in the vineyard in Yavne. What's the vineyard in Yavne? The Beis HaMedrash in Yavne. That just like there are rows in a vineyard, there are rows in a Beis HaMedrash. Bechor l'chama ne'echol. A korban bechor, what's the time frame for eating it? Then Reb Tarfin says, Ve'omar l'shneim v'la le'echod. Says Reb Tarfin, a korban bechor is eaten for 2 days and the night in between. There was there in the Beis HaMedrash, in the Keren B'Yavne, there was in the Beis HaMedrash a young student who showed up in the Beis HaMedrash for the first time that day. Rabbi Yesi Haglili Shmo. His name was Rabbi Yesi Haglili. Amelo Rabbi Yesi Haglili says to Reb Tarfin, he says, Rabbi, minayin loch? How do you know Shneim v'la lechod? Right, we had learned in the earlier brisa because it's compared to Shlomim. But now this is a separate, right? This is an incident that happened in the Keren B'Yavne. Reb Tarfin says 2 days and the night in between. He didn't offer a source for that. So it says Rabbi Yesi Haglili, who had come to the Beis HaMedrash for the first time that day, he says to Reb Tarfin, how do you know that it's Shneim v'la lechod? So Amelo B'ni, so Reb Tarfin says, son, Shlomim kochim kalim, uvchor kochim kalim. I'll tell you why. Look, Shlomim is a kochim kalim, as we know. And so is Bechor. Bechor is also kochim kalim. So, Shlomim is kochim kalim, Bechor is kochim kalim, Shlomim is shneim v'la lechod, so is Bechor. Amelo Rebbe. Rabbi Yesi Haglili then says to Reb Tarfin, wait, but Rebbe, Bechor matana l'koyin, v'chatas v'asham matana l'koyin, but I'll suggest the following argument, says Rabbi Yesi Haglili, that a Bechor is a gift to the Kohanim, right? It's eaten by the Kohanim. It's not eaten by the owner. It's eaten by the Kohanim. And what else is eaten by the Kohanim? Chatos, Osham, the meat of those korbanos are eaten by the Kohanim, not by the owners. So suggests Rabbi Yesi Haglili that just like Chatos and Osham are eaten for 1 day, maybe Bechor is also eaten for just 1 day. I'm going to drink a stick of water quickly, excuse me. So now says Reb Tarfin, Amelo Reb Tarfin says to Rabbi Yesi Haglili, Nidon dover midover v'nilma dover midover. He says, look, let us learn things out from each other. Mashlomim ein ban al chet, Bechor eino ba al chet. Look, a shlomim is not brought for sins. Right? Chatas and Osham are brought for sins. Shlomim is not brought for sins. And neither is a Bechor. Bechor has nothing to do with somebody sinning. And therefore, so, just like Shlomim is eaten for 2 days and the night in between, and is not brought for sins, so also Bechor, which is not brought for sins, is eaten for 2 days and the night in between. Rabbi Yesi Haglili says to Reb Tarfin, he says, but I'll suggest, Nidon davar midavar, v'noma davar midavar, Chatas v'osham matana la'koyin v'chor matana la'koyin. Chatas and osham are gifts to the koyin. Bechor is a gift to the koyin. Machatas v'osham ein boin b'nedu v'nedava. Af b'chor eino b'nedu v'nedava. You don't bring a chatas or an osham as a pledge. You don't say, okay, I'm going to, if you ate chaylim by accident, for example, or benefited from ektish by accident, so you bring a korban chatas, you bring an osham me'ilos, so, you did something, now you have to bring those korbanos. You don't just out of nowhere, out of left field, out of the blue, say, I'm going to bring a korban osham. No such thing. And guess what? Suggests Rabbi Yesi Haglili, there's also no such thing as somebody say, you know what? I'm going to bring a korban bechor. If you have a bechor, you bring it as a bechor. So machad is vashim nechol yom echad, ab bechor nechol yom echad. And therefore suggests Rabbi Yesi Haglili, just like chatos and osham, which are not offered as neder nedavas, are eaten for one day. Also, Bechor, which is not offered as neder or nedava, is eaten for just one day. So we're kind of at a standstill. Reb Tarfon is saying that Bechor is eaten for Shnei Yom V'Layla Echad. Rabbi Yosef Glili keeps on suggesting that maybe you can argue that it's eaten only for one day. Kafas Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva jumped up, Finistalik Reb Tarfon, and Reb Tarfon bowed out. Omar Loi, and Rabbi Akiva says, listen, Rabbi Yosef Glili, Hareyu Omer, the pasuk says, Uvsarim Yeh Loch. Right, the pasuk had said, Uvsarim Yeh Loch kachoza atrufa l'chshok hayomin. Right, that the meat of a Bechor is for the Kohanim like the breast and the thigh. Hakeshin akasav l'chazeh v'shok shel shlomim. And therefore, says Rabbi Akiva, like the Brisa had said at the beginning of the sugya, that when the pasuk says by Bechor that it will be eaten to the Kohanim like the chazav v'shok, like the breast and the thigh, which chazav v'shok? The chazav v'shok of a shlomim. And therefore, just like a shlomim is eaten for 2 days and a night in between, the same goes for a Bechor, is eaten for 2 days and a night in between. Omar Lo now suggests Rabbi Yosef Glili something very interesting, and this is going to open up a whole very interesting discussion that is going to take us until we start talking about Korban Pesach at the end of the daf. But basically, we're going to have a nice little discussion now. Let's go weiter for a second. So, Amalo ikashta l'chazav v'shok shel shlom va'ani makisha l'chazav v'shok shel toda. Suggests Rabbi Yosef Glili, look, Rabbi Akiva, yes, when it comes to Bechor, we're saying that Bechor is like the chazav v'shok, and the Torah doesn't say which chazav v'shok. So Rabbi Akiva, you said that it's been compared to the chazav v'shok of a shlom Shnei Yom V'Layla Echad. I'll suggests Rabbi Yosef Glili that the Torah is comparing the Bechor to the chazav v'shok of a korban toda. And therefore I will conclude, says Rabbi Yosef Glili, that just like a korban toda is eaten for just one day and the following night, so too a Bechor is eaten for one day and the following night. So Rabbi Yosef Glili suggests that the chazav v'shok that the Bechor is being compared to is not the chazav v'shok of a shlom, but rather the chazav v'shok of a korban toda. I'm going to drink a shtickle more water. Excuse me, 1 second. Omar Lo, Rabbi Akiva says to Rabbi Yosef Glili, Hareyu Omer. Rabbi Akiva responds to Rabbi Yosef Glili, Givaldig, but the pasuk says Uvsarim Yeh Loch. Okay, right? The pasuk has said that the Besarim Yeh Loch, that the flesh is for you, Kohanim, like the chazav v'shok. Uchshenemru, where am I? She'ein Talmud lomar lichayiyah. Right? What does the pasuk say? The pasuk says Uvsarim Yeh Loch kachazav atunu v'chshok hayamin lichayiyah will be to you. So it already said Yeh Loch, and then it says lichayiyah. So she'ein Talmud lomar lichayiyah. Why does it have to say lichayiyah if it already says literally, I don't know, maybe 5-6 words earlier, Yeh Loch. So why does it say l'chayiyah? Hosif akosav avoya acheres b'bechor. That there's another havaya, another. It's being compared essentially to another korban, another being, right? Meaning, Rabbi Akiva is saying to Rabbi Yosef Glili, yes, that is a good point, Rabbi Yosef Glili. We can say that the Bechor is being compared to the chazav v'shok of a korban toda. However, it says in addition to l'chayeh, it says yeh loch. In order to say that, and that's extra, to say that in addition to the comparison to the toda, it's also being compared to another korban, which is the shlamim, and therefore, yes, just like you could say that it's eaten for one day and the following night, you can also say that it's eaten for 2 days and the night in between. So therefore, concludes Rabbi Akiva that the korban Bechor can be eaten for Shnei Yomim V'Layla Echad. Now, Uchshenemru Devarim Lifnei Rabbi Yishmael, when this was repeated over to Rabbi Yishmael disagreed with Rabbi Akiva and with Rabbi Yosef Glili to the extent, Rabbi Yosef Glili and Rabbi Akiva disagreed in terms of that. Rabbi Yosef Glili said that a Bechor could be eaten for the Yom V'Layla, whereas Rabbi Akiva says L'Shnei V'Layla Echad. But they did agree, however, Rabbi Yosef Glili and Rabbi Akiva agreed in principle that Bechor, the Chazav Ashok of a Bechor could be a reference to the Chazav Ashok of a Korban Toda. Rabbi Akiva agreed with that. He just says that, however, when the Pasuk then says, Yiyelach, it's additionally comparing it to the Korban Shlam. But in principle, Rabbi Akiva doesn't have any problem, technically, what's the word I'm thinking of? I don't know the word I'm thinking of. Problem, like processor, no, I don't know what the word I'm thinking of. But in principle, Rabbi Akiva doesn't have any issue with learning. So we're saying that the comparison of Chazav Ashok is to a Korban Toda. Now, when Rabbi Yishmael got wind of this discussion between Rabbi Yosef Glili and Rabbi Akiva, Amar Lo, and he says, "Tzu ve'imru lo." Rabbi Akiva, go and tell Rabbi Akiva, Ta'isa, that you've made a mistake because Toda me'echan lamda. Friends, to say that the Chazav Ashok of a Bechor is a reference to the Chazav Ashok of a Toda, the thing is, friends, how do we even know that the Chazav Ashok is offered for a Korban Toda? It doesn't say by a Korban Toda that the Chazav Ashok is given to the Kohen. So then how do we know that the Chazav Ashok of a Toda is given to the Kohen? But I was saying that when it says Chazav Ashok by Bechor, it's talking about it's compared to the Chazav Ashok of a Korban Toda. And just like by Korban Toda is 1 day, so also Bechor is 1 day. The thing is, it doesn't actually say Chazav Ashok by Toda. It says Chazav Ashok by Shlamim. And as we've learned recently, Shlamim and Toda are compared to one another in a Hekesh, right? The pasuk, I was trying to find the pasuk, but anyways, the pasuk by Shlamim that said this is the Torah HaShlamim, and the very next pasuk starts talking about Zevach Toda Shlamim. Starts talking about Korban Toda. So the juxtaposition of Shlamim and Toda means that we can learn Toda from Shlamim to say that just like the Chazav Ashok is offered to the Kohen by Shlamim, so too by Toda. The thing is, it doesn't explicitly say Chazav Ashok by Korban Toda. V'chidavar lamed be'ekish, chozum lamed be'ekish. As Reb Neil will tell you, that davar halamed be'ekish ein chozum lamed be'ekish. And therefore, if Korban Toda, should we bring up the ABC framework? I think I'll spare you. But if Korban Toda itself, the Chazav Ashok, is only learned from Shlamim, how can Toda now be the source to be teaching about Bechor? Therefore, argues Rabbi Yishmael, Ein alech lidom biloshen achrin. Rabbi Yishmael argues, Rabbi Akiva, don't be learning it out like you said later, i.e. that, oh yeah, sure, it could be learned from Toda, just that it says Lachiyah. Elo biloshen rishon. Rather, learn it like you initially had said, that the comparison is to the Korban Shlamim. Rabbi Yishmael, hi, Lachiyah, my ovidlei. What does Rabbi Yishmael learn from Lachiyah? Rabbi Akiva said, he says, L'cha yiyeh, right? So B'sarim yiyeh lach. Rabbi Akiva said that was a comparison to, you could say that's a comparison to Toda, but then when it says Lachiyeh, it's adding an additional Havaya for Korban Shlomim. Anyways, so Rabbi Akiva learns out from both Lachiyah and Besar Yiyah Lach and L'cha, right? So Rabbi Akiva learns out from both Yiyah Lach and L'cha. What does Rabbi Shmuel learn out from L'cha? Limed al Bechor bal mum Shumatana l'kohen shalom zinu b'chol Torah. That Rabbi Shmuel learns out from L'cha that even when a Bechor has a mum, it still goes to the kohen. If you remember, was this on Daf Lamazan? I think on Daf Lamazan there was a machlokas where we had seen at the very beginning of today's Gemara. We had seen the very first Gemara that we saw today. We said, how do we know about the Zrikas Adam and the Emurim by Bechor and Meiser and Pesach? Because by Bechor it says Damam, it says Chelbam. What's the plural? We said, the plural is saying it's not just Bechor, but it's also Meiser. It's also Pesach. Givaldik. Now the shaila is that the very next pasuk by Bechor then starts talking about Uvsarim. Uvsarim Yelach. That the meat goes to the Kohanim. The thing is, what's Besarim? What's plural? That can't be talking about the Meiser and the Pesach, because the Meiser and the Pesach doesn't go to the Kohanim. So what's Besarim in that case? Right? By Damam, Chelbam, we said it's talking about Meiser and Pesach. What's right by Damam, Chelbam, it says plural is for Meiser and Pesach. Besarim can't be talking about Meiser and Pesach because that goes to the owners. So Rabbi Yossi Aglili on Daf Lamed Zayin explained that Besarim is a reference to, say, the plurality of Besarim is to say whether it's a Tam, whether it's a Ba'amum, whether it's healthy, completely healthy, or whether it has a Mum. Either way, it goes to the Kohen by a Bechor. Now, Rabbi Shmuel learns that Damam and Chelbam is talking about the Bechor Shor, Bechor Keseb, Bechor Eiz. The pasuk talked about different kinds of Bechors. So when it says Chelbam, when it says Damam, it's talking about their fats, their blood, the different types of Bechors. And also when it says Bisaram, also talking about the different types of Bechors. How does Rabbi Shmuel therefore learn out that whether it's a Tam, whether it's a Ba'amum, it goes to the Kohen? That's learned out from Licha Yiyeh. That even if it has a Mum, it still goes to the Kohen. So again, for Rabbi Shmuel, what does it do with Licha Yiyeh? Limit Bechor Ba'amum, that's where Rabbi Shmuel learns that even if a Bechor has a mum, it can still go to the Kohen. Because we wouldn't know that anywhere else in the Torah. So therefore, even if a Bechor has a mum, it goes to the Kohen. I.e., usually for a Bechor, you're right. Usually, if a animal gets a mum and you can't offer it on the mizbeach, so then you have to sell it. No, not a Bechor. The Kohen could just eat it. Rabbi Kiva Yalifle mi besarim chatam v'chad ba'amum. As I explained a few minutes ago, Rabbi Akiva holds like Rabbi Yossi Aglili that besarim, right? Rabbi Yossi Aglili had said damam chelbam was a reference to Meiser and Pesach. Besarim can't be a reference to Meiser and Pesach because their meat doesn't go to the Kohen, and therefore besarim is teaching echad tam v'echad ba'amum goes to the Kohen. Rabbi Shmuel mi besarim. And as I had said a few minutes ago, that Rabbi Shmuel learns from Bisaram, it's talking about the flesh of the Shor, Keseb, Eiz. If they're Bechor, they go to the Kohen. Fine. I'm going to drink a shtickle more water. So now, the machlokas between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva gets very, very interesting. Gets very interesting. Right? Because as we've been saying and seeing, Rabbi Yishmael disagreed with the fact that Rabbi Akiva felt that the chaz of a shok of a Bechor could be a reference to the chaz of a shok of a Toda. Because Rabbi Shmuel had said that it's davar alamad behekish and chaz mavekish, right? Rabbi Shmuel said, Rabbi Akiva, how can you be saying that the chaz of a shok of a Bechor is a reference to the chaz of a shok of a Toda? Chaz of a shok by Toda is itself only learned out from Shlamim, which makes Toda davar alamad behekish. How could that be chaz alamad behekish to Bechor? As Neil will tell you, davar alamad behekish and chaz alamad behekish. Of course, we know that the Gemara of Zenene V'Zel Chaser is Reb Neil's Gemara, but now also Davar Lamed Bekish Enu Chazum Lamed Bekish, another Gemara that we have for our friend Reb Neil. So Rabbi Shmuel makes a valid argument. He says, I don't understand. As Reb Neil will tell you, Davar Lamed Bekish Enu Chazum Lamed Bekish. So if Toda itself, Chaz of Ashok, is only learned from Shlam, how could it now be teaching about Bechor? So Chevah, listen up. This is very, very interesting stuff. There's a concept of Heimenu v'davar acher. Heimenu v'davar acher. When it comes to Korban Toda, it's very interesting. Korban Toda is actually kind of a hybrid. Because what are we learning from Korban Toda? What's Rabbi Yossi Aglili learning, and even Rabbi Akiva saying? In principle, what are we learning from Korban Toda? That we're learning that the chaz of a shok by a Bechor is being compared to the chaz of a shok of, meaning when it says it's like, by Bechor it says it's like the chaz of a shok, like which chaz of a shok? That the chaz of a shok of a Toda, in order to teach that just like a Toda is eaten for one day, so too, when I say one day, I mean one day in the following night. So just like Korban Toda is eaten for one day, so too Bechor is eaten for one day. So basically, there are two aspects of Bechor that of Toda that we're working with right now. Aspect number one, chaz of a shok, that the chaz of a shok of a Toda goes to the kohen, and number two, that Toda, or the chaz of a shok of a Toda goes to the kohen. So, and number two, that a Toda is eaten for one day. So while the chaz of a shok, yes, is learned from Shlamim, sure, to a Hekesh, but the Yom Echad, that's not learned from Shlamim. Shlamim Shnei Yom V'Leil Echad. It says by Toda that, right, B'Yom Zevchacho Ye'achel, and I actually don't remember the rest of the pasuk, but by a korban Torah that's eaten, the pasuk says by a korban Torah that's eaten for that day. So we have two aspects, two elements of a korban Torah that we're working with. One is chaz of a shok. Two is that it's eaten for one day. So while chaz of a shok is learned from Shlamim, the one day thing, that is inherent to Toda. So it's Heimenu from itself, from the Toda, i.e. the Yom Echad is by the Toda itself, V'davar Acher, and also from somewhere else, i.e. that Chaz of Ashok is learned from Shlamim. So Toda is kind of a hybrid, and therefore the shaila is, when you have a hybrid like this, can a hybrid be teaching about Bechor? The question is, how do we view the hybrid? Do we view it as a Hekish? In which case, right, so Rabbi Shmuel is viewing it as Hekish. And he's saying, look, Toda is a Hekish. It's being learned from Shlam. And Davar Lamed Bekish, Eino Chozum Lamed Bekish. Can't use it. Rabbi Akiva says, no, we don't treat Toda as a Hekish. And because we don't treat Toda as a Hekish, since it's Heimenu v'davar acher, we don't treat it as a Hekish. And therefore, no problem. Toda can teach about Bechor. Very, very interesting stuff. So, b'maika miflige, 5 lines from the bottom. What's the machlekes between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Akiva? By Savei Menu v'davar acher have a Hekish. Rabbi Akiva says, Rabbi Shimon says, look, Korban Toda, which is Heimenu v'davar acher, that's a Hekish. And therefore, Davar Lamed Bekish, Eno Choser Melamed Bekish. Whereas Rabbi Kiva says, no, Lo Ave Hekish, we don't view a Menu V'Davar Acher as a Hekish, and therefore, it can teach about Bechor Bishlam and the Man Davar Lo Ave Hekish. So I understand, according to Rabbi Kiva, who says it's not a Hekish. Let's stop here. We'll read it inside in a second. Chaver, when it comes to Yom Kippur, I'm going to drink another shtick of water. It's getting late. It's already like 11 p.m., so my throat's getting a little dry. So by Yom Kippur, of course, we know that there's Hazoah Sadam in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and there's Hazoah Sadam in the Heichel. On Yom Kippur, there's a par, there's a sa'ir, there's a cow, there's a goat. The Kohen Gadol goes into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and he takes the blood of the cow, and he sprinkles it by the Aron, 1 above, 7 below. And he does the same thing for the blood of the goat. He then goes out to the Heichel, and he does the same thing by the Paroches, the curtain dividing the Heichel and the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Takes the blood of the cow, 1 above, 7 below. The blood of the goat, 1 above, 7 below. Now, Chaver, let me tell you something. Listen up, friends. How do we know all this? I'll tell you how we know all this. First of all, it doesn't say anything in the Heichel. Doesn't say anything in the Heichel. It says you do in the Heichel like you do in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Right? Ve'alsa is domo kasher also the dama apart. That, where am I? Based on Parochas. Okay. That be'etzem, in the Heichel doesn't say anything. It just compares the Heichel to the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Whatever you did in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, you do in the Heichel too. That's all it says. Now, what does it say in the Kodesh HaKadoshim? I'll tell you what it says. In the Kodesh HaKadoshim, by a cow, it doesn't say anything about the one Hazah above. It only says the 7 below. And by the Sa'ir, it doesn't say anything about the 7 below. It only says about the one above. Let's read these psukim. Right, it says, "V'lokach midam apar, viza be'ezba'o al pnei hakaporos, keidma v'lifnei hakaporos, yaze sheva paimim, min adam be'ezba'o. V'shachat esoyer achat shalom, devi es damo, be'ezah baruch v'oso that's damo, kasher also dam apar, viza also fine." So be'etzim by the par, it only talks about the 7 below. By the Sari, it only talks about the 1 above. But both for the par and for the Sari, we do 1 above and 7 below because we compare them to each other. So therefore, the par is a menu v'davar acher. It says about it, the 7 below, but it learns out the 1 above from the goat. And the same thing for goat. It's a menu v'davar acher. The 1 above is by the goat, but it learns out the 7 from the par. So both the par and the goat, both the cow and the goat are a menu v'davar acher, and yet, we go back out to the Heichel, and we do the same thing that we did in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, i.e., even though both the Par and the Sar are men of Davar Acher, they're still able to teach about what happens in the Heichel. So we have the Par and the goat, which are men of Davar Acher, and they're teaching about the Heichel. So if you view a men of Davar Acher as a Hekesh, how could it teach about the Heichel? So for the fact that they are teaching, that the Hazah Saddam from the Kodesh HaKadoshim is able to now teach us about what to do in the Heichel, means clearly that a menu v'davar acher is not viewed as Hekesh, because if it was viewed as Hekesh, how could Davar Lamed Behekesh, Bechor Lamed Behekesh, how could the Par V'Sar that they themselves are only learned out from comparing to one another, how can they then be teaching about the Heichel? So again, 4 lines from the bottom of the Gemara. Bishlam l'man damar lo ave Hekesh. So I understand according to Rabbi Akiva, who says it's not a Hekesh, that a menu v'davar acher is not a Hekesh. Hanu dichsiv v'chein yaisel oil moyed. So I can understand Where I'm going to read the pasuk. V'chipar al kodesh mitumas b'nei Yisrael b'sheim l'choch adosam v'chein yaisel oil moed. And so will you do, like you did in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, you'll also do it in the oil moed, in the heichel. K'shem shemazeh lifnai v'lifnim achas l'male v'shev l'mata midam apar kach mazeh b'heichel. Just like in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, when it comes to the blood of the cow, 1 above and 7 below, so too you do in the heichel. But now, by the cow, again, it's Heimen V'dav Racher. The 7 below were written by the cow, but we only know the 1 above from the comparison to the goat. And still, it's able to teach about what you do with the dam apar in the eichel. And just like in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, by the blood of the goat, you do 1 above, 7 below. You do the same thing in the eichel, even though the goat is a men of Davar Acher. But if you say like Rabbi Shmuel, that a men of Davar Acher is a hekesh, how could they be teaching? Right? If the par itself is a men of Davar Acher, how could it be teaching about what to do with the dam par in the eichel? Same thing for the goat. So the Gemara gives 2 answers. The first answer is, look, there are 2 different hekeshes. The first hekesh between the goat and the cow, those are animal hekeshes. We're comparing the cow to the goat to the cow. And now we're comparing the heichel to the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Those are 2 different hekeshes. Right? When it comes like the Bechor and the Toda and the Shlamim, those are all korbanos. Those are all animals. When it comes to Yom Kippur, the only comparison of animals is between the cow and the goat. This second hekesh is not between animals, it's between locations. We're comparing what happens in the Kodesh HaKadoshim to now what happens in the Heichel, and therefore it's okay. Alternatively, chutz mipnim b'chad zimna gomer. This is an interesting one. I hope I explain it correctly. That when it comes to something like the Bechor and the Toda and the Shlamim, you need the being able to learn Bechor from the Toda in order to say that Bechor is for 1 day. It's dependent upon the Hekesh that the Toda was learned from the Shlamim. Meaning, we first needed to learn Toda from Shlamim to say that by Korban Toda there's Chaz v'Shok. That then allowed us to compare Bechor to the Chaz v'Shok of a Toda to say that Bechor is 1 day just like Toda. If we never would have had that comparison between Toda and Shlamim, then we would never know about Chaz v'Shok by Toda, and we would never be able to say that Bechor, the Chaz v'Shok that it's talking about by Bechor is the Chaz v'Shok of the Toda. We wouldn't know about Chaz v'Shok by a Toda. The whole ability to say that the Bechor, that the Chaz v'Shok by Bechor is talking about the Chaz v'Shok of the Toda is hinged upon the comparison of Toda to Shlamim. And only once you have that comparison can you then say that Bechor is a reference to Toda and it's 1 day. So in such a case like that, right, so Rabbi Shmuel would argue, yes, Heimen V'davar Acher is a hekesh. However, we would only say that, Davar V'hekesh, Chosman V'hekesh, in a scenario where you need, to go back to our ABC framework, B needs to have been learnt out from A in order for it to be able to teach about C. However, that's not necessarily the case by the Par and the Sar and Yom Kippur. You know what? Even if we wouldn't have first compared, I hope I'm doing this correctly, even if we wouldn't have first compared in the Kodesh HaKadoshim the Par to the Sar and the 7 below to the 1 above, even if we would just have the comparison between the Heichel and the Kodesh HaKadoshim and say that whatever it says about the cow in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, right, it says V'chein Yaiseh B'moed, the same applies to the Heichel. And whatever it says about the goat in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the same applies to the Heichel. Just bring it all over, right? It says, Chutz mipnim b'chad zimna gomer. Just learn it all in one take. Just bring it all over. Even if you don't first compare the Par and Sawyer in the Kodesh Kodashim, just whatever it says about the Par and Sawyer in the Kodesh Kodashim, just bring it over, even without the comparison first, just bring it over to the Heichel. I think the point is that then in the Heichel, you could just make the comparison in the Heichel, right? Kilu, we were describing it that first in the Kodesh Kodashim, we compared the Par and the Sawyer, and we said that in the Kodesh Kodashim, by the Par it's 7 above, 7 below, 1 above. By the Sawyer, it's also 1 above, 7 below. And now we compare that to the Eichel to say, and we're going to do the same thing in the Eichel. But you know what? Even if you didn't first compare the Par and the Sawyer in the Kodesh Kodashim, just say that whatever it says about the Par and the Sawyer in the Kodesh Kodashim, say the same thing about the Eichel. And then in the Eichel, we could do the comparison with the Par and the Sawyer and say, okay, 1 above, 7 below. So the hekesh between the Heichel and the Kodesh Kodashim is not dependent upon there first having been this hekesh between Par and Sawyer. And therefore, Rabbi Shmuel argues it's not a problem from Yom Kippur, because Yom Kippur, it wouldn't be an issue of Dormel Bekish, Enu Chozam Labid Bekish. Now continues the Gemara. You have to read it with the Gos Habach. It says Lo Avekish. Okay, so once again, I understand according to Rabbi Kiva, who says Hemenu v'davar acher is not considered Akish. Hainu dechsiv b'moshvoseichem taviu lechem tnufa. Okay, this is a discussion primarily in Masechta Menachos, talking about a Korban Todah. Who wants to explain to us about a Korban Todah? By Korban Todah, there are 4 types of loaves that are brought with the Korban Todah. 4 types of breads. 3 of the 4 types of breads are unleavened, matzah types. And the 4th one is chametz, mamish bread. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, there are only 2 instances in the Beis HaMikdash where bread, chametz, is offered in the Beis HaMikdash. Otherwise, everything else is unleavened. There are 2 instances where there's chametz in the Beis HaMikdash. That is the shtei alechem on Shavuos, and one of the types of the breads by a Korban Todah is chametz. Now, by a Korban Todah, there are 40 loaves of bread. There's 4 types of breads, 10 of each type, which we're going to get to in a minute. So there are 40 loaves of bread by a Korban Todah. 10 of those loaves were chametz. Now, the pasuk says, "D'chsiv mimashvoseichem taviu lechem tenufa." This is by the shtei alechem on Shavuos. It says, "Mimashvoseichem taviu lechem tenufa." You'll bring the shtei alechem betzim. She'ein Talmud omer aviu taviu. Okay, it doesn't need to say taviu. Ma Talmud omer taviu. Why does it say taviu? Kol she'ata mevi mimakom acher arei hu kazeh. Okay. The extra word taviu is now comparing any other instance of chametz in the Beis HaMikdash, i.e. the 10 loaves of a Korban Todah, the chametz loaves of a Korban Todah, are being compared, you're making a hekesh, are being compared to the shtei alechem. Ma leholan isaron lechala, afkan isaron lechala. And just like by shtei alechem, the pasuk says, it says shtayim shtei esronim. It says by the shtei alechem that there will be 2 breads and 2 isarons. 1 isaron, which is a measure of flour, 1 isaron per bread, per each of the 2 breads, respectively. Right? Shtei alechem, 2 breads were offered on Shavuos. each bread was an Isaron, and we're comparing via a Hekish. We're comparing all instances of chametz in the Beis Hamikdash, which is really just the 10 loaves of chametz by a korban toda. We're comparing those 10 loaves to the shtei alechem, just like by the shtei alechem, each of the 2 breads was an Isaron. Also, each of the 10 breads by a korban toda, of the 10 chametz breads of a korban toda, each one is an Isaron. Okay, so we're learning out the 10 loaves, the 10 chametz loaves of a toda from by a hekish from the shtei alechem. Frag the Gemara, ma'alolan shnei esronim, afkan shnei esronim. The Gemara suggests, wait, maybe, there's 2 ways to look at the shtei alechem. One is to say that it's an isaron per bread. The other way is to say that it's 2 esronim total. Maybe that's what we should be learning by the 10 loaves of a korban toda. Not that it's 1 isaron per loaf, and therefore we're talking about 10 isarons. No. Maybe it's that it's 2 isarons total. Just like by the shtei alechem, it's 2 isarons total. Maybe by the 10 loaves of a toda, it is 2 isarons total, and therefore each loaf is only 1/5 of an isaron. Tamloma tiyena, therefore it says tiyena. Apparently it says more about it in Menachos, but for now we'll just accept that it says tiyena, and therefore, no, it means that each of the breads of a korban toda are going to be in isaron. Okay, fine. Now, so through the comparison to the hekish of the chalas of a toda to the shtei alechem, we learn that it's an isaron per bread. Now, by the korban toda itself, by the breads of a korban toda, it says, and this I would have to look up. I don't think that we have it here. It says be'etzem, although Rashi quotes it. It says v'hikriv mimenu echad mikol korban truma la'Hashem. It says by the korban toda there were 4 different types of breads. It says, and you'll take 1 of each type of bread and give it to the kohen, and we compare that to Trumas Meiser, and we said it's just like Trumas Meiser is 1/10. Basically what we say is that when it says that you will give from each type of bread to the kohen, basically it means 1 out of 10. That's how we learn out that there are 10 of each type of bread by a korban toda. By korban toda there's 4 types of bread, and we're saying that there's 10 of each type for a total of 40, and 1 of the 10 of each type, 1 of them goes to the kohen. So 4 out of the 40 go to a kohen. Now that pasuk is written by korban toda. So what's the point? The point is that korban toda is a scenario that the chametz breads of a korban toda are a scenario of heimenu v'davar acher. How come? Well, heimenu, what are we learning out from the chametz breads of a korban toda? What's written by the chametz breads of a korban toda? That tarimu, right? When it says echad mikol korban, right? V'ikriv mimenu echad mikol korban truma la'Hashem, that is written by the chametz breads, or that's written by the korban toda, from which we learn out that there are 10 breads. And therefore, by the korban toda, we learn out that there are 10 breads. And from the shtei alechem, we learn out that it's an isaron per bread. So therefore, the chametz breads of a korban toda are an example of heimenu v'davar acher. Heimenu, we learn out that it's 10 breads. And v'davar acher, we learn out that each bread is an isaron. So lamadnu asar l'chametz. So we learned out that there are 10 breads for the chametz breads, and that it's an isaron per bread. Asar l'matzah minayin. How do we know that also for matzahs there's going to be 10 of each, and that it's a total of 10 isarons for the 30 matzahs, which is interesting, right? Meaning, it's 1 isaron per bread for the chametz breads, for a total of 10 isarons for the chametz breads, and we're comparing all 30 of the matzahs to the 10 of the chametz. Just like the 10 of the chametz are 10 isarons for the 10 chametz loaves, it's also 10 isarons for the 30 matzahs, i.e., a third of an isaron per matzah. So asar l'chametz, asar l'matzah minayin. How do you know 10 for the matzahs? Talmud Omer al chalas lechem chametz. That by, we had seen the pasuk recently where we talked about the rikikin and the revuchin and the chalas by korban toda, and it says al chalas lechem chametz, and those are to be brought with the 10 chametz loaves. That neged chametz ave matzah, that we compare the matzah to the chametz. To say that just like it's 10 isarons for the chametz, it's also 10 isarons for the matzah. So what do we see? Even though the chametz is a menu v'davar acher, even though chametz is something that we learn the 10 loaves from it, but we learn out in isaron per loaf from shtei alechem, so even though the chametz loaves by korban toda is a menu v'davar acher, still we're able to learn via hekesh to the matzah loaves of a korban toda, i.e., something that's a menu v'davar acher can still teach, right? If we use the ABC framework, if A is shtei alechem, B is the chametz loaves of the korban toda, and C is the matzah loaves of a korban toda. Even though the chametz loaves of lechem toda of the toda was learnt out via, right, from, at least part of it was learnt out from shtei alechem, it could still teach about matzah because the chametz loaves are hemenu v'davar acher, and hemenu v'davar acher is not considered a hekesh, like Rabbi Akiva says. So Elamanda Omar Havi hekesh Michael, but if you say like Rabbi Shmuel that hemenu v'davar acher is a hekesh, then how can it be teaching about the matzah? Tavlam v'hekesh enu chosam lam v'hekesh. Reb Neil. So Taviu Yiseri, well, Rabbi Shmuel would argue that by shtei alechem, the word taviu is extra, it's a riboy, i.e., that it's not teaching to the chametz loaves of a toda via a hekish, in which case it's davar hekish, chosma hekish. Rather, taviu is a riboy. It's coming to include the chametz loaves of a toda to make it not just like a hekish, but says Rashi, as if it's written by the chametz breads of a korban toda, that it's an isaron per loaf, and therefore, if it's as if it's literally written by the chametz loaves of the toda, well then, the comparison then to matzah is a comparison from something that's literally written. We're treating it as if it's literally written by the chametz breads of a toda, and then just the halachos of the chametz breads of a toda are now being compared to the matzah. There's no hekish anymore to shtei alechem. No, because the taviu by shtei alechem is extra, and it's a riboy. It's including the chametz loaves of the toda to make it as though it's literally written by the chametz loaves of a toda, that it's an isaron per loaf, and then that is being compared to the matzah, argues Rabbi Shmuel. However, if it were to have been a scenario of a hekish, of a menu v'davar acher, it would be considered a hekish, and davar lamed v'hekish eino chozer lamed v'hekish, argues Rabbi Shmuel. And now we get up to the final section of the daf, and the final section of Perek Ezehu Mikomen. HaPesach einu nechol. We had said in the Mishnah that Pesach is only eaten at night, and it is only eaten until Chatzos. Montana, whose opinion is it that the Korban Pesach is eaten, only until Chatzos? Omer of Yosef says, Yosef, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah eats, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, the son of the Brisa, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Omer, Nemar kan balayla azeh. It says balayla azeh. I believe, by Korban Pesach. It says by Makas Bechor balayla azeh. Malol and Archatzos arkan Archatzos, just like by the Makas Bechorus, we're talking about Chatzos, midnight. Also, by the Korban Pesach, we're talking about midnight. Omli or Bekiva says to Belos ben Azai, V'alok V'nemar. But the Pasuk says also by the Korban Pesach, V'chaltem also B'chipozin, that the Korban Pesach has to be in B'chipozin ad Shas Chipozin, until the time that you got to get moving. When did they have to get moving? When did they leave Mitzrayim? Be'etzem hayom hazeh, the next day. So you have until the morning. Imken matamud lom b'layla hazeh. Then why does it say b'layla hazeh according to Rabbi Akiva? She'achol yeh k'chol ha'kodshim v'necholin b'yom. Well, normally korbanos are eaten during the day that they're offered. Right? Korban shlamim, you slaughter it, you offer it. Now you could start eating it that day, and the night, and the next day. Korban chatas, the kohanim eat it that day. Korban Pesach is an exception. Korban Pesach is not eaten the day that it's slaughtered. It's eaten that night that it's slaughtered at the Seder. So if it says, Balayla azet amlo, Balayla yenechol, v'nechol bayom. The Korban Pesach is eaten at night, not during the day. Omele Abai says Abai, umimai derab Elazar ben Azariah v'doraisa dima deraban v'larchik min avera. Abai asks interesting kasha to Reb Yosef. Okay, yeah, okay. So says Abai to Reb Yosef, look, yeah, right. I know there's a machlokes in Reb Elazar ben Azariah and Reb Akiva. Reb Elazar ben Azariah is the one who says chatzos, and the Mishnah is saying chatzos, so it must be Reb Elazar ben Azariah. But how about this, Reb Yosef? Maybe the Mishnah is like Rabbi Akiva, you have until the morning, but the reason why it says chatzos is la'achik es adam min aver, that you have until the morning. But as we know from the first Mishnah that we ever learned together in Masechta Brachos, that whenever it says until Amud HaShachar, right, that whenever, well, it says in the Mishnah, whenever we say chatzos, it really means till Amud HaShachar, but why would we say chatzos? To prevent people from eating noser. Right? Technically, you can eat it until the morning, but we wanted to say till chatzos to make sure you don't go overboard and eat it when you shouldn't be eating it. So maybe when it says chatzos here, it's just a safeguard. So imken my, where am I? So the rise of doma derabon lachik min aver imken my ela ad chatzos. Yes, but interestingly, when it comes to Korban Pesach, it says Pesach enechal ela enechal ela ad chatzos. Now we had seen, for example, by the Toda and the El Nazir, it says B'chol Maichol Yom V'Layla Ad Chatzos. It says Ad Chatzos. Korban Toda, you can eat it until Chatzos. It doesn't say Ella Ad Chatzos. Why by Korban Pesach does it say Ella Ad Chatzos? Only until Chatzos. It's to say that it's only until Chatzos, not until Amud HaShachar. Elikyosim Ha'osum D'Oraisa Avkan Nami D'Oraisa, that in the Mishnah it says those are the oraisa. Also, we're talking about, when we're talking about chatzos, we're talking about the oraisa as well. We're talking about Reb Elazar ben Azariah, Hadjan Olach, Ezum Ukoman. We will come back to Perek Ezum Ukoman, Givaldig. On Daf Nun Zayin of Masechta Zevachim, of course, we finished the Perek of Ezu Mikoman. Everybody give yourselves a pat on the back. First of all, it was a challenging Perek. It was a long Perek, a lot of descriptions of the Mizbech and the Beis HaMikdash. So, a very important Perek. So, Chevre Shkoyach for that. We discussed the Bechor, the Meiser, and the Pesach. We had initially said that one, right, that you do, was it matona? What do we say? What does it say? V'damanton matona echos uvavachi think neged. That it's one that you throw it's one zrika on the mizbech, but it needs to be where there is yesod, as we learned that from Korban Ola. We discussed the time frame to eat Bechor and Meiser. That was really the big sugya of today's daf. Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva say it is 2 days and the night in between, although they learned it out from different reasons, which actually got into that whole big discussion of, can you compare Bechor to the Korban Toda? We got into Emenu v'Dover Acher. Rabbi Akiva says Emenu v'Dover Acher is not like Akish. Rabbi Shmuel says it is like Akish. There was that whole thing, but at the end of the day, they do both say that the Bechor and the Meiser can be eaten for Shnei Yom V'Layla Echad, whereas Rabbi Yosef Glili says only 1 day and the following night. And then at the end, we discussed the time frame to eat the korban Pesach. Of course, the Mishnah said it's until Chatzos. We discussed the machlokes in Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who says midoraisa it's until Chatzos. Rabbi Kiva says midoraisa you have until the morning, but midorabbanan we say until Chatzos in order to prevent you from doing that avera. But we said that nonetheless, the Mishnah when it says Chatzos, it's like Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah that it's talking about midoraisa until Chatzos. Friends, that was the Nun Zayin of Masechta Zevachim. I hope you had a good time. Cheers.